Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Unnamed Podcast, and of course, I'm your host RJ Akash, aka Evil Monkey. The Unnamed Podcast में मैं बात करता हूँ कुछ ऐसी अमेजिंग पर्सनालिटीज के साथ जो अपने काम से अपनी लाइफ में तो चेंजेस ला ही रहे हैं, साथ ही साथ सोसाइटी में भी अमेजिंग चेंजेस ला रहे हैं. एंड इन केस आप खुद एक ऐसी शख्सियत हैं या फिर आप किसी ऐसी पर्सनालिटी को जानते हैं जो अपने काम से अपनी लाइफ में तो चेंजेस ला रहे हैं, साथ ही साथ सोसाइटी में भी अमेजिंग चेंजेस ला रहे हैं, देन फील फ्री टू ड्रॉप मी एन ईमेल ऑन evilmonkeyden@gmail.com या फिर आप द अननेम्ड पॉडकास्ट बाय ईविल मंकी इस फेसबुक पेज पर जाकर वहां पर भी अपना कमेंट डाल सकते हैं. अगर बात करें हम आज के अपने गेस्ट की तो मेरे इस पॉडकास्ट पे वी हैड लॉट मेनी अमेजिंग पर्सनालिटीज जिनके साथ मैंने बहुत अमेजिंग बातचीत करी है, और आज की जो मेरी पर्सनालिटी है वो भी काफ़ी यूनिक है. हिज नेम इज डॉक्टर अरुण थरेजा एंड ही इज द हेड ऑफ द डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ द ENT डिपार्टमेंट इन महाराजा अग्रसेन हॉस्पिटल, और साथ ही साथ ही इज द फाउंडिंग मेंबर ऑफ ग्रुप ऑफ डेली सुपर बाइकर्स ऑल्सो नोन एज गॉड्स. तो चलिए अरुण से बात करते हैं एंड लेट्स फिगर आउट that how his passion for motorcycling has increased over the years and how difficult was it for him as a doctor during the pandemic times. Hello Arun, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Evil Monkey, I would say.
Thank you. And so how have you been holding up during these corona times, man? Like being a doctor, I think it might have been pretty tough for you.
Yeah, it was and still is, because my specialty is like that. I have to be very close to the face of the person. I'm a ENT surgeon, so ear, nose, throat. So I have to examine the throats also. And nose also, and that's where the the whole virus is there, and it starts from there. So it still is an issue there, but then I let go for the first initial 2 months. I was not seeing any patients, but then I had to, and then after 2 months I started my hospital duties also in Maharaja Agarsen Hospital, where I had the department. So now I take all the adequate precautions and all that, and I'm seeing patients. Obviously there are many who turn out to be corona positive, but I guess that's part of the job now.
Exactly. So being a doctor, if you are treating a patient and if you come to know that patient has been tested for corona positive, so what are your reactions, or what precautions do doctors basically take if they come across any patient like this?
First is, if you are really in a close contact and you are handling a corona patient in a corona ward, so then you have to be totally protected from the PPE kit. Right. No part of the body has to be exposed to anything which is around the patient. So that is most single important precaution. And if a suspected case you are seeing in OPD, then it's tough to be in PPE kit for so many hours. So the basic ones like the mask, the shield, the glove, and a disposable gown. These are the basic things which me and many other colleagues use while we are attending the OPD. So that's it.
That's it. And do you guys ever there must be the fear of if you are going back to your home, and there is always that lingering fear of you might be an asymptomatic person, and you going back home might be able to. So how do you deal with that thing?
Nothing. We have to deal with it head on, because there is no escape. You have to do that. You are doing it for so many years now. So like I said, part of your profession. So initially you are scared about the family, but then as the time passed, you took it in your stride. Okay, fine. Let's see. You're doing your best. Even when I come back home, I take off the clothes, change into different ones. That's it, I guess. You get used to the whole entire situation after a couple of weeks or months, and then you're not that scared at all.
Right. And you've been working with in the medical profession for such a long time. I don't think so any such thing which is we are currently facing has ever come up in the recent times, has it?
Oh, never. This whole of the entire world hasn't seen something like that, especially our generation.
Right.
You guys especially, and even us, the older generation, we haven't seen anything like this before. So obviously it's a global pandemic, as you know, and everybody was taken by surprise. Okay, wow, I mean, even in this century, such things can happen. They can bring down, I mean, the entire population to its knees within a couple of days. So nobody expected that. But I always believe there has to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and this too shall pass. Maybe another 6, 8 months, but definitely it will be over next year, somewhere in the middle.
Let's hope for the best for that.
Right. It
Right.
has to happen. It has to
Exactly.
go.
Exactly. And like talking about, you're just not a veteran doctor. You are also a veteran motorcyclist, and like you have been doing motorcycling and biking for such a long time. So where did your enthusiasm and passion for motorcycling started from?
And it just started not from my childhood, I would say, not even the school days. I was fascinated. It just happened in the final year of my MBBS in the medical college, and the year was 1985 when I just saw this Yamaha RD350 being introduced in
Oh.
India. It came in 84, and then after a couple of months in 85, I just saw that, and I was just bowled over. So then they started the whole thing in the showroom. They kickstarted it, and boy, I mean, at that moment, I realized that I was meant for this.
Mm.
I was born to do this. So that's how, out of the blue, this passion struck me. Like I said, nothing from my childhood days, the fascination for cars or bikes, and even the whole school life went like that.
Mhm.
But and then the moment RD, which I still have, incidentally, in a
Oh, that's
mint
nice.
condition. That's my first bike, and I'll never let it go. The 85 model,
Mhm.
high torque HT model, like they used to say.
Nice.
So that whole thing started. I immediately got it back home, all thanks to my parents, because that was still expensive at that time. Other machines, the 100 cc's, and yes, these and bullets were half the price.
Hmm.
And I still remember paying 23 grand for that at that time. And dad was really perplexed. Why can't you just pick up a second-hand Fiat? So I said, no, dad, thanks, sir. I don't like four-wheelers at all. So that's the reason I want this. So that's how the whole thing started. And then gradually, within 2 years, I came across a four-stroke twin Kawasaki 440 LTD.
Mhm.
So the friend had, so he was disposing. So I picked that one up. So that's how the journey began, with multi-cylinders and four strokes and all that.
Right.
So then, like they say, there was no looking back. So many bikes came in, the super bikes and all that. So
Yeah.
that's how it started.
That's how.
Sudden ignition inside me in final year of it.
So it was just a talk thing, right? It just gave you a big torque.
Yeah, I mean the whole thrill. I mean, a person who doesn't have any inkling of motorcycles, or how do you feel when you sit on one? Suddenly, this RD, you realized
Right.
all my dreams. Okay, wow, this I'll be doing for the rest of my life.
Absolutely.
That kind of a thinking. Yeah.
And like, how did the idea for the group that you're part of, group of Delhi Superbikers, Gods, how did it
Yeah.
came about?
Yeah, that also just happened out of the blue. So I was riding solo from 85 onwards till 98. So a lot of trips on these big bikes, but all solo.
Okay.
So I got used to the whole thing. Though sometimes it was very boring, and sometimes you used to get stuck with these bikes, and with the hardly no internet, no telephones, also nothing, and you are stuck because of a fault which you don't know how to rectify. The paths are not available, but that was part of the learning curve, I would say. So then in 98, I found a gentleman who's still very much part of the group, who still stays there in Old Delhi near Jama Masjid,
Okay.
Rais Bhai. So I came to know he had a Honda, a 750 V4 Interceptor.
Oh.
So somehow I got hold of his landline number, and that's how we connected. And that's how we started riding together. And within a couple of months, I would say, another person, a dear brother to me, Gurinder Singh, he had a CB 400 RR. So they were also just riding here and there, all solo. So that's how we all connected, the three of us. And we started riding together 98 onwards. And then within a year or so, on a Sunday morning ride, I just told them, guys, this is the name. It has just come into my head, GODS. And they were like jumping, wow, what a name. Let's keep it. Doctor register karao and all that. And within 2-3 years, I got it registered also.
Oh, very
So that's how, out of the blue, it struck me, GODS, and that's how it has been. So we started with 2 people, 3 people, and now we are roughly 125 to 130 people.
Well, that's pretty awesome.
600 and above is the criteria.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And that brings me to my next question. So what are basically the guidelines to become the member of the Gods group, and like what are the most craziest encounters and adventures you guys have had? Because like from 98 till 2020, so you guys might have like n number of rides and many things that have happened.
So initially when we started, we were not that particular about the safety aspect also, and super bikes were a rarity in the country at that time. So gradually in 2002, 3, a couple of other people also came in. So the number went up to 10, 12. So then after some of not so great incidents involving such people who had no previous experience, and they straight away picked up the super bikes, they went down, they took down the other people also on the ride, and then we had to face the wrath of the family. कि आपके साथ गया था, you should have been responsible, kind of a thing.
Right.
So that's we learned our lesson, and after that, I think 2004 we became very strict with the selection of people. So now we follow, obviously, apart from having a 600cc and above, one should have minimum 1 year riding experience of that big bike. So I would just presume 8 to 10,000 kilometers annually. A person who has ridden, he qualifies for that criteria, and he's okay. And then obviously the age is minimum is 26 years, so he has to be over 26.
Correct.
And these are the basic 3 ones. And obviously once you get then I call them, these people, for a preliminary interview with the senior members, and then we have a chit chat, informal kind of a thing, and then finally we say yes. And obviously that person got to have the entire riding gear from top to bottom. So that's what we have been following since 2004, the selection criteria. So because it's the quality of people, the maturity of the people, which is most important for any group or any society. So that is the safety. It involves the safety of every rider. So we don't want any hooliganism kind of a thing happening, or show-offs, people who are not genuine in riding. So that's the reason these criteria are now religiously followed.
So my question to you was like, nowadays, buying a super bike is far more easier than it was way back like 10 or 15 years ago. And like there are all these groups that are coming up, and like with kids riding motorcycles who are like at the age of 20 or 25. And so like when you see them and like you hear that some mishap has happened with somebody in some group, so what are your reactions about those?
Obviously, it's a very sad situation, and it becomes more sadder because people don't learn from their mistakes or from the previous incidents or mishaps. They still don't learn. That is the saddest part. So that's the reason, at least here in Gods, at least we take the first step. I mean, the selection of the people, the riders. That is the first step which you can do to make sure you have mature people, not these, again, like repeating myself, not the show-off kind of people who are not serious about motorcycling and the safety involved with that. So obviously it is not a great sight, and it's never a great news anywhere in India when it happens. People have gone down because of their own mistakes. So even the best of the riders do go down because the way the things are in our country, the roads, the people around you. But still, at least when it is your own fault, then it's a more saddening situation, that it could have been easily avoided if they were not racing with each other, or they were not at very high speeds and all. So obviously, and like, again, people should learn. If it happens with anyone, the one should be more cautious about this whole thing. I will never do that kind of a feeling. I will enjoy the passion safely, and I'll respect the others around me on the road. So that's the reaction all the time whenever something happens. We feel
And do
very
you, yeah, and do you feel like, because you have been doing riding and like you have been, riding superbikes for such a long time, you feel like that there is also a lack of, like if we, in terms of licensing in India also. So like when we talk in terms of, if
yes.
you go in states or some other parts of the country or
Yeah,
other parts of the world, so they have some limits for, like, if you have this kind of a license, you can
true,
only ride
true.
this amount of cc
Correct.
of motorcycle. So like in
Correct.
India, there is a lack for that.
Obviously, it's never going to happen. Also, because the way we function, nobody will like that, and no politician will implement that. So that's the problem. Otherwise, the UK is a system of UK is excellent, like and you just said. I mean, depending on your age, you are allowed a certain CC of a two-wheeler. So
Correct.
that's how you progress from 14 years to 16 to 18. And then once you are okay with everything, then the premium also is not that less. So it is a deterrent kind of a thing to have very big bikes. So that's why 600 cc's are pretty popular outside, because they have a lower premium annually as compared to bigger bikes. So
Right.
they have a system in place. That's the reason everything is in place. So sadly, this is never going to happen here, and we'll be seeing such fatalities again and again, year after year. That is the saddest part. No change is going to happen.
Very true, very true. And when we talk about like motorcycles and like touring and also, is there some trip that you are like, you really, it's close to your heart that you have done and like it's like
Oh.
always comes up?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many lovely adventures, nationally also and internationally also. Difficult to pinpoint one, but overall, I would say since I started visiting Leh Ladakh from '99 onwards, it's been a almost a very high frequency kind of a destination. So I've seen it from a zero kind of a developed area, and now we have almost 80% of tarmacs. So
Right.
that particular area, the whole group enjoys so much because it's full of adventure. If I were to give you an example, last year we were there. I
Hmm.
think I was there for the 10th time or so, but then we chose deliberately a very inner kind of a area along the side of the Pangong Lake, by the name of Merak, and which comes out to Sokar. So that 220 odd kilometers, there are no roads. It's totally sand and rubble and rocks, and also it was great fun being in that innermost area where there was no direction in that sense, because the no roads were there, and you had to stop in between after 1 or 2 hours to see and feel that if you're in the right direction or not. So
Correct.
that was again a very amazing experience, because there was a huge group, 25 plus people, and this kind of a thing, and we are reaching at midnight, past midnight, around 1:32. A couple of people, 4 5 of them lost their way in the night,
Oh,
so we had to go back, retrieve them, and finally when we landed up in Sokar, it was 2 a.m. It was bone chilling cold. The water had frozen. So those things are always ingrained in your memory forever. So that was one. I mean, I would say a very extreme kind of a adventure last year. There's so many like that.
all right.
Internationally, I would like to say around three in 2016, we were there at the Isle of Man TT Racing.
Oh,
So
nice.
we had done UK, the entire UK top to tip, and then we had gone and Scotland also, and then we took out three to 4 days of this racing
Hmm.
extravagance, and this was one, I would say, out of the world experience, being there, standing so close to the bikes, and while they are doing 250 plus, and on the street roads, as you
Exactly.
know, with hardly any protection all around. And again, unfortunately, one rider had died in that year also. But
Oh,
that thing, so close to you, you are in a courtyard of a house, and they are zipping in front of you in
exactly.
those crazy speeds. So that was one experience which still is unforgettable.
I
There are
think
so many
that is
like,
much more, memorable than going at a race circuit and like watching.
I would say definitely. I've seen the Sepang racing also, MotoGP and all, but nothing comes close to what IOM TT has to offer. It is out of the world. Every biker has to see that before he dies. It's
Absolutely.
it's it has to be seen by every biker. The whole atmosphere of the island once the races are also over. You see bikes and bikes everywhere. right from early 80s to the latest ones. I mean, the parking lot, you can spend hours in parking lots only. They are so beautiful, clicking pictures. That's what I did all the time. So the whole thing, and there's so many people traveling from different parts of the world on their motorcycles to the IUMTT. So many couples I saw and met them. They were in their 70s, and they were coming there regularly every year, year after year. Somebody was from Europe, somebody was from US also. They ride all the way. That's the
Wow.
best part. Yeah, they ride all the way. Whether it takes 10 days, 12 days, they ride to TT. So these experiences really are hair raising, I would say. And
Exactly.
they are so emotionally rich, and they make you they inspire you all the time. Such people inspire you. There are museums there, private collectors. I would name one, Peter Murray. He's a gentleman, a legend in himself. He has his own museum. He must be in his 80s. But what a lovely place he's got with all those amazingly beautiful motorcycles. So these experiences, I would say, I would rate the top in our list. But then the list, like I said, is endless.
Endless. I can totally understand that. And like you have ridden to, as you said, that you have ridden to Leh for more than 10 years, maybe 10 times. So like, do you guys take your super bike, or like is it like you rent something else and ride it
No,
in
no, we
like?
start from here only, but then we have the ADVs in our times when I started way back. So I was on a Enfield Lightning. It was introduced in '97, so I took it there, the Lightning 535.
5535, right?
535. So not a great bike. I mean, at that time there
Yeah.
was no disc brakes and all, but I did some jugaad and I fitted the front disc of that Enfield Fury,
Oh,
which was a bike available in India at that time, 175cc, two-stroke single. Enfield had imported Fury.
okay.
It had a disc brake. So I put the whole unit, the disc and the Magura master cylinder on this Enfield, and then I took it. But yes, it was underpowered, but at least it went on and on. So then at that time, the four of us were there. So two RX 100s were also there. So at that time, we were just on these basic bikes, but they went. The fear was always there about having a flat. Oh, there was no option of tubeless. But then later on, after 2001 or so, then I picked up a Charisma. Then I used to take Charisma there to this particular place and to Spiti Valley and many others. At least I was confident that we can handle the puncture without removing the wheel.
Correct.
So then 2012 onwards, the Dukes came, and now majority of us, we have our own 390s in the garage for this purpose only.
Oh.
And some of the group members have the big ADVs, the Tigers 800s and the 1200s.
Right.
So now we have a mix of Dukes and these ADV bikes, which we go to Leh Ladakh or Spiti Valley or wherever.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah. So that's
and like so like over the years, like how do you see the biking culture in India? So like, because in '98, I bet like you and like I think there was no biking culture in '98 as far as India is
98 to chalo, I mean, it's a later thing. When I started in 85, there was zero.
Right.
In 85, nobody had seen a super bike. In 86, when I used to ride the 440 parallel twin Kawasaki. So those were the days, and I couldn't imagine one day we would be having every kind of a machine easily available right in the showroom here.
Correct.
So that I could never imagine in the 80s, but it has happened. And over the years, obviously, it's been a boom. This thing is booming. The motorcycling culture, the traveling culture, the accessories and the safety gears and everything is going up. So that's the best part. Obviously, we are not a biking country like the other countries. For example, UK,
right,
where the roots were there right from the early 1900s, since the bikes were invented. But then we slowly caught up. As you know, it's basically a commuter kind of a thing. The Hero Hondas and all.
Correct.
The biggest number of commuter bikes are here in this country. But then this enjoyment part, enjoying riding, seeing the entire world or your own country on a motorcycle, this has come up very well. And I'm very pleased to see that so many people have taken up to riding. for long distances. There's so many lovely meets happening. The groups are having their own meetings once a year or twice a year and some exotic destination. So obviously, I feel very, very happy that we are doing pretty well regarding this aspect.
Very nice, very nice. And like, what is there any dream bike of yours that you still want to own? Because I know there might be some.
Oh, again, I mean, you keep thinking of, more is never enough kind of a thing.
Especially
So,
with
like it's
bikers.
written on my, yeah, like it's written on my garage, BHP, brake horsepower, more is never enough. You're always wanting for more. So there are number of them, though I have plenty of my own in my garage, but still, right now, a very, very ferocious machine is the Ducati Panigale V4.
Mm,
That is one lovely machine which I would like to have. So that is right from the production. I mean, not a customized motorcycle,
right.
because then you can have anything in the world, but right out of the factory, this particular machine, because I've ridden it on the track also.
Okay.
It is one of the most ferocious machines built. And especially if you add on a couple of aftermarket goodies, then actually it becomes uncontrollable.
Wow.
It's actually you feel you cannot. I still remember that day when it was a race prep bike with the flashed ECU and the aftermarket exhaust and all that. I was scared to look down at the speedometer. I mean, I had to keep my eyes glued through the front windscreen. It was so bloody fast that I dare not see the speedo.
Oh shit.
So those machines are very, very exciting. Obviously, you need a lot of maturity also,
Exactly.
because you can go down within a fraction of a second.
Absolutely.
They are that potently dangerous also. So that is one machine, like I said, on my wish list right now.
True, true. And like, on a closing note, is there any message you want to convey to any young riders who are listening to our podcast and like who are thinking of moving maybe from a mid-size motorcycle to maybe a liter motorcycle or maybe something more mature to ride on? So like, are there any tips you want to give to them?
Yeah, the usual, because I always keep telling people to be careful when you ride a motorcycle. One has to be fully protected. That's my first thing. And proper riding gear. If you're investing a couple of lakhs, let's say, even if you're going in for, let's say, a Duke or some Indian bike, it is not cheaper than 1.5 lakhs or 2 lakhs. So
Okay.
if you're spending that much of money on a motorcycle, spend 25-30,000 on a very decent gear, because you can get all the good stuff in this price range. There's no need to go and spend 1 lakh on the riding suit. I mean, even in 25-30,000, you can be covered properly from top to bottom.
Exactly.
So that is my first piece of advice, to be properly geared every time of the day or night whenever you're riding. So it's a matter of life and death, and you have a family back home which is looking for you all the time.
Correct.
So please remember that. That has been my message and will always be. And second is, treat them like your babies, the motorcycles. I mean, ride them with passion, but don't be a show off. Don't do stupid stunts on the road. And that the image of motorcycling then takes a very bad hit. कि सारे bikers ऐसे होते हैं.
Correct.
Everybody's like that. So that kind of impression obviously is still around, but gradually it is changing as more and more sensible people are riding.
Correct.
So that is my second message. Treat your motorcycle with love and respect. Treat it like your own child. Never abuse it. Never redline it unless you are on a track. Obviously, that's a different ball game.
True.
So, and third is be a responsible citizen. Take care of the people around you. Again, comes to the kind of driving you do or riding you do on the road. If you're a sensible rider, every other person will love you on the road, will give you the way, will wave back at you. But if you try to zigzag or do a wheelie in the middle of moving traffic, everybody will curse you.
Exactly.
So just maintain the decorum, and then see what life has to offer in this beautiful passion known as motorcycle.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Arun, for coming on the Unnamed podcast and like sharing your time with me and like sharing your knowledge about motorcycling and your passion for it, man.
Yeah, most welcome. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
सो आई होप कि आपको ये एपिसोड ऑफ द अननेम पॉडकास्ट बेहद पसंद आया हो, एंड इन केस यू आर एंजॉइंग दिस कंटेंट, डोंट फॉरगेट टू फॉलो दिस पॉडकास्ट वेयर एवर यू आर गेटिंग योर पॉडकास्ट, एंड आई विल सी you in the next episode of the Unnamed Podcast. Till then, you guys stay cool, stay tight, and live life human size.